Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Colossians. We're still in chapter 1. We're at verse 15. And we've looked so far at the first 14 verses of the book. And in those verses, you recall, Paul introduced himself. He gave his greetings to the church in Colossae. And then he lets them know that he is praying for them. And what a great prayer it is that he offers on their behalf. And then as he starts verse 15, we find a section, a paragraph, which contains one of the great statements about the nature of Christ. Paul goes into some detail about who Jesus is, how he is fully God, who has come in the flesh, and thus he is fully human. He begins to talk about the wonder and the nature of the incarnation, that Christ, who is God, also became man in order to save us. This wonderful statement on the nature of Christ is found in verses 15 through verse 20 of chapter 1. And interestingly enough, when we get over to chapter 2, he has another paragraph where he will emphasize again this nature of Christ. That will be in chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. We'll get to that eventually. Now, the reason that Paul gives such detail and such wonderful teaching on the nature of Christ is because he is combating a false teaching that had arisen in the Colossian church. Remember, we talked a little bit about this before during the introduction. That one of the things going on in Colossae was some false teachers had come in. They had infiltrated the church, and they were giving false doctrine about the nature of Christ. Historians call their false teaching the Colossian heresy. Remember, heresy simply means a teaching about the nature of Christ that is false, so completely false that it is contrary to all the revelation of the Scripture. So that is going on in Colossae. Now we're going to notice when we get to chapter 2, verse 8, Paul is going to tell the Colossians, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ." You see, that verse, he's going to refer to this empty philosophy, this false teaching that is not dependent on Christ, this Colossian heresy. So, Paul wants to counter the false teaching about Christ by giving them the true teaching. Make sure they understand who Jesus truly is, fully God and fully man. Now, before we begin to look in detail at Paul's statements about the nature of Christ, we need to talk a little bit about what this Colossian heresy entailed. It is the beginnings, historians tell us, and theologians tell us, of a false teaching that would later cause lots of problems in the church, a false teaching that we today refer to as Gnosticism. Gnosticism spelled Gnosticism. Now that comes from the Greek word for knowledge. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. So Gnosticism said in their false teaching, they were giving you some secret knowledge. That's why it was called Gnosticism, because they said that we have some secret knowledge that tells you the way of salvation. And only the most knowledgeable people can understand it. You see, they had sort of an elite status ascribed to themselves, that they had this special teaching, and they were now sharing it with everyone else. Gnosticism was a great threat to the church because it devalued who Christ was. For one thing, they denied that Jesus was fully God. They said that Jesus was a lesser spiritual being, less than God, greater than humans, they thought, but less than God. They were denying the deity of Christ. They were also denying the humanity of Christ. You say, well, that's kind of strange. How can you deny that he was human? We see, part of Gnosticism was the belief that all matter was evil. All material things were evil. Only spirit was good. So nothing truly material could be good. So they said Jesus only appeared to be human. He was actually a spirit less than God the Father, but a spirit who came upon this man Jesus and sort of inhabited him for a little time. So you see how this weird teaching that Jesus was not fully God, but yet a spiritual being, but not man at all, just inhabiting the form of a man while he was on the earth. That denied the very basis of the gospel, that Jesus has come for us, God become flesh to save us. And this false teaching of Gnosticism had infiltrated the church and was threatening the foundation of faith. So, Paul wants to make sure they understand who Jesus truly is. They have a true doctrine of Christ, knowing that he was fully God and fully man, so that they will not be led astray by this false teaching of Gnosticism. You know, that's still important for us today, because there are still those who promote false teaching in the church, who try to turn us away from Jesus. There are still those who say that Jesus was not fully God. They say he was just a great teacher or a great moral example, but not fully God. That's a form of Gnosticism. So that false teaching still exists within the church, and we need to make sure we're protected against it by holding to the true teaching of the gospel. And so that's what Paul wants to begin to talk to us about in verse 15. And that's why it begins by saying the Son is the image of the invisible God. He is the firstborn over all creation. Now, tomorrow we're going to go into detail about what that means, but he is affirming the full nature of God and full humanity of Jesus. In other words, he's going to tell us that Jesus is fully God and fully human. We'll begin to look at that in some detail in our next session. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Colossians.